The Velthara cruiser dominance hung in Earth's orbital shadow like a metallic predator, its crystalline hull refracting starlight into prismatic warnings. Within its command chamber, High Acquisitor Kethvar studied the holographic displays with predatory satisfaction. The blue-green world below pulsed with precious metal signatures that made his secondary hearts race with anticipation. "Remarkable," whispered Tech Weaver Nixora, her six-fingered hands dancing across the sensor arrays. "The primitive world contains more gold reserves than the Velthara Empire has accumulated in 3 centuries of conquest. Their crude civilization sits atop a treasure beyond imagination." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in amusement. The galaxy's dominant species had built their empire on gold's unique properties: its perfect conductivity for their bio-neural networks, its resistance to cosmic radiation that protected their most sacred technologies. Without gold, Velthara, ships couldn't navigate hyperspace. Without gold, their civilization would collapse into feudal darkness. Surely these humans will be reasonable, mused Sub-Commander Vextitan, studying the intercepted transmissions scrolling across his screens. Their broadcasts speak constantly of trade, commerce, mutual benefit. They appear to worship gold themselves, calling it precious, fighting wars over it, adorning their leaders with it. The first contact protocol had been elegant in its simplicity. A single transmission to the humans' primary communication networks translated into their dominant languages, offering technological marvels in exchange for their excess precious metals. The Velthara had perfected this approach across 100 worlds: show strength, offer trinkets, demand tribute. The pattern never failed. Kethvar's tactical display showed the human response forming. Primitive chemical rockets lifting from the planet's surface, carrying representatives to their crude orbital station. The species moved with surprising coordination for such a fractured civilization. Their planet bore scars of countless conflicts, yet somehow they had achieved basic spaceflight and nuclear capability within mere millennia of developing agriculture. "High Acquisitor," Nixora's voice carried puzzlement. "Their reply contains complications. They speak of negotiations, terms, environmental concerns. Most curious, they reference something called historical precedent and express wariness about visitors seeking their resources." The command chamber fell silent except for the low harmonic hum of Velthara technology. Kethvar had witnessed the submission of the crystal farmers of Andros Prime, the eager capitulation of the gas miners near Vega's rim, the terrified compliance of the spiral arm colonies. Never had a species questioned the Empire's benevolent offer of technological advancement in exchange for natural resources. "Perhaps," Vextitan suggested carefully, "we should demonstrate the consequences of refusal. A few of their cities reduced to slag might clarify their thinking." But Kethvar raised a restraining claw. Intelligence was the Empire's greatest weapon, and these humans intrigued him. Their radio chatter revealed a species that had somehow survived repeated near extinctions, developed multiple competing ideologies, and still managed to reach for the stars. They fought each other constantly, yet cooperated when threatened. They created weapons of world-ending power, yet restrained themselves from using them. "No," he decided. "We proceed with the standard protocol, meet with their representatives, assess their weaknesses, identify their leaders. These humans appear to understand commerce. They will recognize a superior position when presented properly." The human delegation was approaching in their primitive vessel, its chemical engines, crude but functional. Soon, Kethvar would stand before another species about to learn the fundamental truth of galactic civilization. The Velthara Empire took what it needed, when it needed it, and resistance only determined whether the taking would be peaceful or violent. What he couldn't know was that aboard that approaching human ship, representatives from Earth's most militarized nations were studying Velthara technology with the clinical focus of apex predators evaluating new prey. The human delegation arrived aboard a vessel that offended every Velthara aesthetic sensibility. Where their ships flowed like living metal, The human craft was all angles and brutal functionality. Where Velthara technology hummed with harmonic resonance, the human engines roared with barely contained combustion. Ambassador Kalen Rourke floated through the docking tube with the easy confidence of someone who had negotiated arms deals in 12 different war zones. Behind him, Dr. Lydia Voss carried equipment that looked scientific, but scanned with capabilities far beyond its apparent purpose. The third member of their team, Colonel Dmitry Kozlov, moved with the predatory stillness of a man comfortable with violence. "Welcome aboard the Dominance," HFY intoned, his translator rendering the words in what the humans had designated as English. "I am High Acquisitor HFY of the Velthara Empire. You stand within the technological pinnacle of galactic civilization." Rourke's smile never wavered as his eyes cataloged defensive positions, energy conduits, and structural weak points. "Impressive architecture. We appreciate the invitation to discuss trade relations." The Velthara had prepared their standard presentation chamber, holographic displays showing the Empire's vast reach across the galaxy, demonstrations of technological marvels that had reduced other species to awestruck compliance. Cities floating in gas giant atmospheres, planets stripped to their cores and rebuilt as massive habitats, stellar engineering projects that harnessed the power of entire suns. Behold the achievements possible when primitive species accept guidance from their superiors, HFY proclaimed. "The Velthara offer knowledge beyond your comprehension in exchange for your cooperation." Dr. Voss leaned forward with apparent fascination. "Remarkable. Your power sources must be incredibly efficient to support such massive constructions. And your materials science. Those hull composites could revolutionize our industry." "Indeed," HFY preened. "Our bio-neural networks require specific rare earth elements to function optimally. Your world possesses these materials in abundance. Surrender 90% of your gold reserves, submit to imperial oversight of your remaining mining operations, and humanity will receive technology that will advance your species by millennia." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Colonel Kozlov shifted slightly, a movement that somehow suggested coiled springs and hair triggers. Dr. Voss continued taking readings with her instruments, her expression growing more intrigued by the moment. 90%, Rourke repeated, finally. "And oversight of our mining operations, in exchange for technological gifts that we didn't request and couldn't evaluate before committing to your terms." "The Empire does not negotiate," Vex Titan interjected. "We offer opportunity for mutual benefit, nothing more." "I see." Rourke's diplomatic training kept his voice level. "You might find human nature more complex than anticipated. We have extensive experience with entities who arrive offering development in exchange for our resources." HFY's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Surely you understand the alternative? The Empire's military capabilities exceed anything your species could imagine. Compliance ensures your survival and prosperity. Refusal—" He gestured at the holographic display showing orbital bombardment platforms reducing a planet's surface to molten glass. Dr. Voss's instruments were chirping softly, almost musically. She was mapping energy frequencies, power distribution patterns, and structural resonance points with equipment that looked like geological surveying tools but functioned as military intelligence gathering systems. "We'll need to consult with our governments," Rourke said smoothly. "Decisions of this magnitude require careful consideration by our elected representatives." "You have 72 of your hours," HFY declared. "Return with your species' compliance, or we will demonstrate why the Velthara Empire has never failed to acquire what it requires." As the human delegation prepared to depart, Colonel Kozlov spoke for the first time. His words were quiet, delivered in the tone of someone stating simple facts. "You should know that humans have been invaded before. Many times. We've learned things." The Velthara command crew watched the primitive human vessel detach and begin its journey back to Earth. They had followed the standard protocol perfectly: demonstrate superiority, offer conditional mercy, threaten absolute destruction. What they didn't understand was that aboard the human ship, Dr. Voss was already transmitting detailed technical specifications to every major military installation on Earth. The Velthara had just provided a complete intelligence briefing on their capabilities, power systems, and tactical doctrine to a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of warfare against technologically superior opponents. Earth's response began before the human delegation's ship touched ground. In underground bunkers across 6 continents, analysts pored over Dr. Voss's intelligence package with the intensity of scholars discovering ancient secrets. The Velthara technology was impressive, certainly, but it followed comprehensible principles. Their power systems relied on gold-based superconductors. Their hull materials, while exotic, showed specific resonance frequencies. Their weapons operated on energy patterns that could be mapped, analyzed, and countered. General Yuki Nakamura stood before the holographic displays in NORAD's deepest command center, watching as Earth's military apparatus awakened from its post-Cold War slumber with frightening efficiency. "Assessment," she ordered. "Conventional. Military response is impossible," reported Admiral Chen Wei-Lin, his voice carrying across quantum-encrypted channels from Pacific Fleet headquarters. "Their orbital platforms could glass our surface installations before we could launch effective countermeasures." However, Dr. Elena Petrov's voice joined from the Moscow Institute of Theoretical Physics. "Their technology demonstrates several critical vulnerabilities. Their bio-neural networks require specific electromagnetic frequencies to maintain coherence, disrupt those frequencies, and their ships become very expensive debris," finished Dr. James McCready from MIT's Special Projects Division. "The good news is that we've been accidentally jamming those frequencies for decades. Every radio telescope, every deep space communication array, every high-powered radar installation generates interference patterns that would make their systems." Hiccup. General Nakamura studied the tactical projections floating before her. Earth's surface bristled with installations the Velthara had dismissed as primitive: radio telescopes that could be recalibrated as weapons, particle accelerators that could generate targeted interference, and satellite networks that could coordinate a response across the globe. "What about their ultimatum?" asked someone from the European Space Consortium. "Irrelevant," Colonel Kozlov's voice carried from the briefing room where the delegation was undergoing intensive debriefing. "They expect compliance or destruction. They don't expect war." The assessment was grimly accurate. The Velthara Empire had conquered species that surrendered immediately upon seeing superior technology, or species that fought briefly before being overwhelmed. They had never encountered a species that viewed technological disadvantage as merely another tactical problem to solve. In shipyards that had been building commercial vessels just hours before, emergency construction protocols initiated projects that had existed only as theoretical designs. Spacecraft that looked like cargo haulers but carried experimental weapons systems. Mining ships retrofitted with military-grade sensors and communication arrays. Even the International Space Station began receiving mysterious upgrades as supply. Missions delivered equipment that definitely wasn't on the original manifest. The most significant activity was invisible to orbital observation. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, facilities that officially didn't exist were activating systems that had been theoretical just days before. Dr. Voss's intelligence package had revealed something crucial about Velthara technology. It was elegant, efficient, and absolutely dependent on specific conditions to function properly. Human technology was none of those things. It was brutal, redundant, and designed to work under the worst possible circumstances by people who assumed everything would go wrong at the worst possible moment. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Earth's response crystallized around a simple principle that had guided human conflict for millennia: if you can't fight fair, don't fight fair. The Velthara expected either surrender or futile resistance followed by rapid defeat. They had no framework for understanding a species that responded to impossible odds by becoming genuinely dangerous. Captain Miranda Volkov sat in the command chair of the cargo vessel Defiant Hope, watching her crew make final preparations. Around her, volunteers from a dozen nations worked with equipment that had never been tested outside of laboratory conditions. Her ship was one of 47 vessels that would soon demonstrate humanity's first principle of interstellar diplomacy. All stations report ready, her executive officer announced. Signal the fleet, Volkov ordered. Commence Operation Golden Rule. Above them, the Velthara cruiser Dominance waited for Earth's inevitable surrender, its crew confident in the predictable nature of primitive species faced with overwhelming technological superiority. They were about to receive an education in our human nature. High Acquisitor Kethvar received Earth's response precisely at the 72-hour deadline. The human transmission was brief, delivered in multiple languages with formal diplomatic courtesy that somehow managed to sound like barely contained rage. The nations of Earth respectfully decline your generous offer. We wish you safe travels and suggest you consider this our final communication on the matter. Nyxora's sensor arrays immediately detected movement across Earth's surface. High Acquisitor, they're launching vessels. Primitive chemical rockets, dozens of them, from multiple continents simultaneously. Kethvar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Observe their futile gesture, then demonstrate why the Empire's patience has limits. Target their primary population centers. 3 cities should suffice to encourage reconsideration. The Dominance's primary weapons powered up with harmonious energy cascades, their gold-based focusing systems drawing power from the ship's bio-neural core. Orbital bombardment was simple, elegant, and absolute, precisely what separated civilized species from primitive ones. The first indication something was wrong came when the weapon systems flickered. Power fluctuation in primary array, reported Vextitan, his voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty. Bio-neural network experiencing minor interference. Compensate and fire, Kethvar ordered. The weapons fired, sending lances of coherent energy toward Earth's surface. They struck empty desert, empty ocean, and an abandoned city that had been evacuated hours before. The humans had somehow predicted the target selection and responded accordingly. Impossible, breathed Nyxora. How could they know our targeting protocols? That was when the human ships reached optimal range and revealed their true nature. What had appeared to be desperate refugees fleeing their doomed world suddenly began transmitting coordinated signals across frequencies that made every Velthara system convulse with electronic agony. The vessels weren't carrying colonists or supplies. They were flying antenna arrays, each one broadcasting interference patterns specifically designed to disrupt bio-neural networks. Dr. Voss had spent 72 hours analyzing Velthara technology, with the focused intensity of someone whose species' survival depended on finding weaknesses in superior systems. She had found them. The Dominance shuddered as its primary systems began failing in cascade patterns. Navigation flickered between accurate readings and impossible paradoxes. Weapons targeting became unreliable, then completely inoperative. Life support systems maintained function, but began operating at reduced efficiency. All systems experiencing critical interference, Vexatitan reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. Bio-neural networks cannot maintain coherence under these conditions. Kethvar watched his holographic displays dissolve into static, then reform showing impossible readings. Withdraw to minimum safe distance. Recalibrate all systems. But withdrawal required navigation, and navigation required the bio-neural networks that were currently convinced they were simultaneously in 7 different star systems while also being inside a black hole. The human ships pressed their advantage, with tactics that would have been impossible for any species that hadn't spent millennia perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. They swarmed the disabled Velthara cruiser like wolves circling a wounded elk, maintaining precise formation to maximize interference patterns while avoiding the cruiser's theoretical weapons range. Captain Volkov's voice reached every ship in the human fleet through conventional radio systems that functioned perfectly despite the electromagnetic chaos surrounding them. All vessels, maintain pattern Delta 7. Let them see what happens when you try to take gold from people who learned. Warfare fighting each other. Aboard the Dominance, emergency protocols activated systems that had never been tested under these conditions. Auxiliary power routed around disabled bio-neural networks, restoring basic functionality to critical systems. HFY found himself staring at displays that showed his mighty cruiser reduced to basic operation, while primitive human vessels danced around him with impunity. "How?" he demanded. "How do they know our weaknesses so precisely?" Tech Weaver Nix Aura, working frantically to restore system coherence, provided the answer with bitter irony. High Acquisitor, analysis of their interference patterns suggests they reverse-engineered our technology from the demonstration we provided during negotiations. The truth was both simple and devastating. The Velthara had shown these humans their capabilities, expecting awe and submission. Instead, the humans had studied every system, analyzed every frequency, and identified every possible failure point with the methodical thoroughness of apex predators evaluating prey. In the command center of the Defiant Hope, Dr. Voss monitored the effectiveness of their coordinated assault with scientific fascination. Their bio-neural networks are incredibly sophisticated, but they're also incredibly fragile. Remove the precise conditions they require, and the whole system becomes unreliable. "How long can we maintain this?" asked Captain Volkov. "Indefinitely," Dr. Voss replied with satisfaction. "Our power systems are crude but robust. We can broadcast these interference patterns until their life support fails or they surrender." The Velthara Empire was about to learn that sometimes primitive technology represented not a weakness, but a fundamental difference in engineering philosophy. The standoff lasted 6 days. For 6 days, human vessels maintained their interference patterns around the crippled Velthara cruiser, while Earth's surface buzzed with activity that transformed an entire civilization's industrial capacity toward a single purpose. What the humans accomplished in less than a week would have taken most species decades to coordinate. High Acquisitor HFY stood in his darkened command chamber, watching auxiliary displays flicker with unreliable data. The Dominance had become a prison of malfunctioning systems and failing life support. His crew worked frantically to restore basic functionality, while the primitive human vessels circled endlessly, their crude engines burning with persistent defiance. "Status report," he demanded. "Bio-neural networks remain compromised," Nixora replied, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We've restored basic navigation and minimal weapons capability, but targeting systems are unreliable. The humans' interference patterns adapt faster than we can compensate." Vex Titan approached with news that made HFY's secondary hearts flutter with apprehension. "High Acquisitor, long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures emanating from the human homeworld. They're constructing something." The sensor data, fragmented and unreliable due to ongoing interference, showed Earth's surface ablaze with industrial activity. Orbital platforms were being assembled at unprecedented speed. Ground-based installations that had been radio telescopes were being reconfigured into something far more threatening. "They're building weapons," HFY realized. "Primitive species. Don't build weapons this quickly." What he couldn't understand was that humans had been building weapons continuously for their entire recorded history. They had simply never before had a target that required such focused effort. Dr. James McCready stood before the completed array at the Arecibo site, now transformed into something that would have impressed the engineers of any galactic civilization. The massive dish could focus electromagnetic energy with pinpoint precision across interplanetary distances. Similar installations across Earth were coming online with capabilities that existed at the intersection of theoretical physics and human desperation. "We're ready," he reported to the Global Command Network. General Nakamura reviewed the tactical situation from her command bunker. Earth now possessed weapons that could disable Velthara technology at any range, but more importantly, they had demonstrated something that would reshape galactic politics forever. "Open a channel to the Velthara vessel," she ordered. Captain Volkov's ship transmitted the communication request using protocols the Velthara had provided during their original negotiation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Kethvar's image appeared on human displays across the globe, his alien features showing strain and confusion. Behind him, his command center looked like the aftermath of a technological catastrophe. I'm General Yuki Nakamura, speaking for the nations of Earth," she began. "We're prepared to discuss terms." Terms? Kethvar's mandibles clicked with forced authority. "The Empire does not negotiate with primitive species." "The Empire," General Nakamura replied calmly, "currently has one disabled cruiser surrounded by hostile vessels with its crew facing life support failure within days. We, meanwhile, have 47 ships in perfect working order and enough interference capability to keep you there indefinitely." The silence stretched across space while Kethvar processed this impossible situation. The Velthara Empire had never encountered negotiation from a position of weakness. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "First, you leave our system immediately and never return. Second, you broadcast a message to your empire explaining that Earth is not available for conquest or resource extraction. Third, you provide us with star charts showing the locations of every species you've conquered in the past century." "Impossible," Kethvar snarled. "The Empire will not—" His words were cut off as every system aboard the Dominant simultaneously failed. Earth's new weapons array had just demonstrated its capability by temporarily disabling every piece of Velthara technology within range. The effect lasted only seconds, but the message was clear. When the systems restored, General Nakamura continued as if nothing had happened. "We've studied your technology, High Acquisitor. We know how to break it. We also know how to build better versions of it." That was the truth that would change everything. Humanity hadn't just learned to disrupt Velthara systems. They had learned to improve them. Dr. Voss's analysis had revealed principles that human engineers could apply with brutal efficiency. "The species of Earth make you one final offer," General Nakamura concluded. "Leave now with our terms, or discover what happens when apex predators decide you're a threat." Kethvar looked around his crippled command center, at his exhausted crew, at displays showing human vessels that could maintain their siege indefinitely. For the first time in Velthara history, the Empire faced a species that responded to conquest with engineering solutions. "We accept your terms," he said finally. The human response was immediate and coordinated. Interference patterns shifted to allow the Dominants to restore minimal functionality while maintaining the implicit threat. Star charts flowed through communication arrays as the Velthara complied with demands they had never imagined facing. As the cruiser limped away from Earth's system, Kethvar transmitted the required message to Imperial Command. The content was simple and unprecedented. "Earth system is hostile territory. Approach not recommended." What he didn't mention was that the humans were already building ships based on captured Velthara technology, but without the critical weaknesses that made it vulnerable to disruption. 6 months after the Velthara departure, the galaxy began receiving transmissions that changed the fundamental equation of interstellar civilization. The signals originated from the Sol system and carried a message translated into 47 different languages. "This is Earth. We are humanity. We are open to diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts with any species interested in peaceful coexistence. We are not interested in conquest, subjugation, or resource extraction arrangements. Choose your approach accordingly." Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of the EAS Retribution, humanity's first interstellar warship, watching the test firing of weapons systems that combined human engineering principles with captured Velthara technology. The result was something that worked under any conditions, generated massive amounts of interference as a side effect, and could be manufactured using resources available in any star system. "Target destroyed," reported the weapons officer. The target had been an asteroid that perfectly matched the mass and composition of a Velthara cruiser. Throughout the galaxy, species that had lived under Imperial dominance for centuries began receiving technical specifications for weapons that could disable bio-neural networks. The data packages arrived with simple messages. From the humans of Earth, for species interested in independence. Dr. Voss, now director of Earth's Xenotechnology Research Division, reviewed the intelligence reports flowing in from across known space. The Velthara Empire was fragmenting as conquered species applied human-developed countermeasures to their own liberation efforts. "Remarkable," she mused to her assembled staff. "We solved their technological superiority problem in 72 hours. It's taken the galaxy 6 months to realize that the Empire was never as powerful as everyone believed." The truth was both simpler and more complex than anyone had anticipated. Velthara technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also incredibly specialized. Remove the specific conditions it required, and it became useless. Human technology was crude by comparison, but it was designed by a species that assumed everything would break at the worst possible moment and built accordingly. Captain Volkov, now commanding the fast attack vessel Defiance Spirit, led patrols through Earth's outer system alongside ships from 12 different species that had requested Earth's protection during their own liberation movements. The human fleet had become the nucleus of something unprecedented, a defensive alliance based on mutual protection rather than conquest. The real change, however, was happening in the deeper reaches of space where former Imperial subjects were discovering what happened when species that had been enslaved for generations suddenly possessed weapons that could destroy their oppressors' most powerful ships. High Acquisitor Kethvar, stripped of rank and exiled to a mining station on the Empire's frontier, monitored the communications traffic with growing horror. 43 worlds had declared independence. 7 Imperial fleets had been destroyed by newly liberated species using human-designed weapons. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia was collapsing faster than anyone had thought possible. The final irony came when his former command, the rebuilt Dominance, arrived at his mining station carrying a delegation of former Imperial subjects. They wanted to negotiate mining rights for rare Earth elements using fair trade agreements rather than conquest. "We learned something from the humans," explained Ambassador Trixana of the liberated Andromedean Collective. "Violence creates enemies. Commerce creates partners. We're interested in partners." Back on Earth, General Nakamura stood before the United Nations General Assembly delivering humanity's first State of the Galaxy address. Behind her, holographic displays showed the transformation of galactic civilization from imperial dominance to something resembling organized chaos with democratic tendencies. The Velthara sought gold from Earth, she concluded. What they received were guns, ships, and defiance. What we've given the galaxy is something more important. Proof that technological superiority doesn't guarantee victory, and that freedom is an engineering problem with engineering solutions. In the audience, Dr. Voss smiled as she watched data. Streams showing human-designed defensive technologies spreading across the galaxy faster than any empire had ever expanded. Humanity had become what the Velthara had never imagined, a species that responded to the threat of conquest by making conquest impossible. The galaxy was learning what Earth had always known. When someone tries to take everything you have, the appropriate response is to make sure they regret the attempt so thoroughly that no one else ever tries it again. And in the deep space shipyards around Earth, construction continued on vessels that carried a simple message emblazoned on every hull. We are human. We are here. We are not going anywhere. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of mutual defense had begun.